Our next speaker is Eric Michael Tollefson. He is a frame conservator from the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and his talk is The Reframing and Mounting of Ginevra De Benci for Exhibition. Thank you, Eric.
I also have to thank the organizers of the forum for having me today, because I'm not a mount maker. I'm a frame maker. And I never considered myself a mount maker until I was here last year, and BJ suggested that I come to the forum after I relayed the story I'm about to tell you. I also need to thank my colleagues at the gallery, without whose help I would not have been able to do this in such a short amount of time. A little context for that is I arrived at the gallery the end of July of 2019. I wasn't able to get my hands on the object until mid-August, and the press day was September 10th. So it's a little bit of a tight deadline. And so, to begin, the National Gallery of Art, in the summer of 2019, we were preparing to mount the first ever monographic exhibition in the United States of Andrea Verrocchio, the innovative Renaissance artist and teacher whose pupils included, among others, Perugino, Botticelli, and Leonardo da Vinci. The exhibition brought together some 50 of Verrocchio's masterpieces, allowing viewers to appreciate his work in painting, sculpture, and drawing, how they stimulate each creativity across each medium. To illustrate his vision and his influence on the students' training, some of his pupils' works were included in the exhibition, including National Gallery of Art's own crown jewel, the portrait of Ginevra De Benci, one of only 3 female portraits completed and the only Leonardo da Vinci painting in the Americas. The current installation, was in a baffle that had been there for about 30 years, which was about 5 feet across and 7 feet tall. And you could view the backside by walking around, and there was a cavity in which you could see the verso of the painting. The current mount and frame design, they had been integrated into the baffle, so a new mount and frame design was needed for the exhibition. The unique characteristic of this that it is two-sided, but also that this painting was cut down in its past, and an additional material was added to the bottom edge of the cut painting. I'm going to edit a little bit since we're running on time. Once we took it off view, I had a very brief moment to review the previous installation to kind of help guide where I would go with this, because like I said, I just started. This is my first task that was handed to me when I started at the gallery. Measuring up was kind of a stressful situation. Handling this was, this painting is never taken off view, and so when it is taken off view, everyone wants to get their hands on it so they can be analyzed and photographed. So the panel's fairly flat for its age, but there was some slight warping and cupping and variations in thickness in the panel. And as you can see here, this is the material that was added, adding the kind of the problem in how you mounted this for viewing on both sides inside 2 frames. So what we did was we traced every edge of this panel in order to try to get a real sense of the shape of the object. I had about 2 hours to do this before I was going to go back on view. Shout out to the mount shop. Some views showing how it fit in its current frame, showing the extra piece sticking out the back and the way that this was adhered inside the previous frame, which was period. And due to the way these were constructed, there was no way to, well, it was possible to perhaps use the frame in the new installation, but there was a great risk of destroying the frame. And if that happened, then we would be back to square one with what to do. So the decision was to manufacture 2 frames that we could put on the new display. So we began research on what type of frame would be appropriate for this. We ended up settling on a Florentine cassetta frame design, but sans sgraffito because of the time constraint. And here's kind of an early mock-up of what we were considering to scale. And it was actually during the process of this talk that I remembered how I actually came up with the idea for what I did. Starting with a sketch of a frame, bringing that into Photoshop, and the evolution of the mount was kind of taking form as I progressed. Coming up with the idea of two trays that would encapsulate the painting, creating a more unified outside dimension. So I started by doing a wood mock-up of this, and then translated that into CAD drawings in order to get a more comprehensive, exacting view of what this would be. Some different views of the mock-up. And then going into how the frame would interact with the tray, and the tray would interact with the mount. Originally, this was going to be the sections of the frame were going to be able to be attached to the base of the frame, which would be attached to the mount, which evolved as I went through the iterations of how these would go together. You can see here the black piece, that's the panel, and the recto and verso frames. Altering the frame design a bit. Now this is the top view looking down, which you'll see in a moment because I have a animation showing how this all comes together. And then the variation of the frame design was getting more simpler as the time was getting shorter as we were approaching the date. And this is the top-down view of the plinth, which is where the mount would penetrate through the plinth into the base of the pedestal, into the deck. And so this is an exploded view of all the components and how they would work together. And I have a little kind of view in how this works. I can show you that here. So you get a view of the detail of the mount. And it was clear when I made the prototype in wood that the only material that would be strong enough to withstand warping would be steel. And then we have a view of inside. This is the part that's accommodating that extra section of wood that's sticking out. And this addition was in-painted years ago, but that has always been something that's been hidden inside of the frame, whatever frame it's been in, which you can see there in the bottom of the painting. And then this is the view of all of the components. So the wooden mount that goes into the deck, the steel tray that goes into the wooden mount, and then the frames that cover and are attached with, of course, magnets. And then we have one more view of the completed piece. Just so that I could see that this did make sense. This was all in about 2 weeks' time designed. So once we were kind of confident that this would work, we began manufacturing the steel case. I'm not a welder, but I fortunately had a studio mate who was a sculpture tech at Corcoran and a sculptor, and he agreed to do it in the short time frame of about 10 days. And he used TIG welded with 303 and 304 stainless. And we did a test fitting with the Ginevra early morning as to not take it off view needlessly again, but this needed to happen just to ensure that the measurements I took, that everything was going to fit. If any adjustments needed to be made, we could make them at this point. But it fit perfectly, which was surprising. We expected something to go wrong. And we painted the inside edge, the only part of the mount that you will see, we painted with golden MSA colors. Thank you, Robert. He recommended that to me. So now that this fit, and I knew it fit, then I could begin on the frames, because there simply was no time that if I had made the frames and there was an alteration we had to make here, I couldn't also make that in the frames. I had able to do some prep work on the frames, which are carved and gilded, but nothing could be cut to size. So at this point was essentially the countdown of how much time does it take for glue to dry. And the various parts of that, how the frames went together. They were purposely made in pieces and assembled and gessoed separately, and then in the final stage assembled and gessoed so that they would have some natural cracks forming as these parts moved slightly, as though but they were still very secured together. And here's our test fitting of the tray in the wood mount, or wood mount in the pedestal. And one alteration was once I slid it in, it added about 20 pounds, which is very stabilizing, but also no way to get it out. So we added this small, here I can see a little drawing, and we cut away a little finger hole to get your fingers in to push it out. So once I knew this fit, the frames are assembled, all we had to do is finish the frames. So the mount was now brought up to the exhibition where Ginevra was put inside Sand's frame. So now she's just waiting for the frame, and we all thought she looked a little happier in her new mount here, which I think she is. So here we are, the day, I think this is the day before press day. Exactly. And you know, I really have to thank my colleagues again, because especially the facilities and guards and art handlers who really helped me navigate, I was a new staff member in a museum, how to work in an institution, because normally I would just work through the night, which I could not do in this instance. But I had about a few hours of work left to do, but not in the day. And my supervisor said, well, it's not like you'll be fired, but this would follow you around for a while if you didn't make this deadline. Like, got it. So I said, can I take them to my studio? She said, yes. So we got a property pass and took these to my studio where I could do the final patina on these frames and then allow them to dry with the rest of the night, which wasn't much. But I stayed up through the night. I think the final day I worked a 27-hour day to get these done. Arriving at the museum at about 7:30, where they were installed by 8, and on display. And then the exhibition, the press event. There's a picture of me somewhere in here, just blurry because I'm lack of sleep. But yeah, it was a real test of materials and how they could dry. And the exhibition ended in January, but it was so well received that they decided to, the original plan was to put it back in the baffle, but everyone loved how it unified the front and back paintings together, so that it was more of like a unified object than walking around a wall and seeing another painting and then realizing, oh, that's the back of that. Plus, you can see it a little more clearly from the back. And there she is today. Thank you. Any questions?
Is this on? Okay.
Yes.
I was just curious what you used to tone the gold leaf.
Well, it was a thin shellac and casein paints.
Okay. I also was curious why you used the casein paints for the frame.
water-based, and they've dried really fast.
Oh.
So they're not going to do any kind of off-gassing like a Japan paint or any kind of oil-based toner would, which being inside a bonnet was a real concern. Even if we had the time to let this fully dry over weeks, that was a concern. So in instances like this where things are being waterproofed or climate-packed or in a bonnet, yeah, I try to use water-based materials that aren't going to be a problem.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have one virtual question.
Yes.
They say, this is fantastic. I may have missed this due to a wee audio glitch, but I was wondering if the steel tray set directly against the painting or if there was any material need to have a buffering material.
The steel tray was lined with Velara, quarter-inch. There was a lot of space. That was a big concern about this. I only had about an hour to measure the piece, and I actually fabricated a maquette to scale as best I could with the drawings I took. But we gave about a quarter-inch of space around for Velara, and then there was Velara on the face of the rabbits of both. And then the frames themselves don't actually touch the painting at all. They hover about a 1/16 of an inch over, and that's all kind of kept in shadow. You can kind of see it on the verso because of that extra piece. The rabbit is quite deep on the top and two sides, but for most of it, it's just kind of hidden.
Thank you.
Had you ever done a project like this before with a double-sided frame on a pedestal? Or
No.
Was this your first stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I've done crazy things before, but nothing like this,
Oh.
and nothing of such importance.
Very, very impressive. Very good work.
Thank you.
Will you go back in it sometime and do this graffito work, or will you just leave it with the plain black?
I would like to do this graffito over. We don't have any plans currently to change it, but when that does happen, if given the opportunity, I would love to add this graffito to the panel. The frames are fabricated with that in mind. I can actually remove the panel with a little bit of work to just simply remove the panel and maybe do just a little bit of repair in the frame to simply change that and not have to reframe them both. Also, this could be reframed without touching the painting at all, because simply they just click on with two small magnets, just enough force to hold them in place. So, we have the dimensions of the site size. We simply just need to fabricate two new frames, and the frame can be swapped out in about 20 minutes, simply lifting the bonnet up, placing the new frames on without taking it off view at all. Because whenever we take this off view, the public, we get a lot of phone calls because people come to the gallery to see this painting. So we want to keep it up as much as possible, and now we don't have to touch the painting ever unless we want to. Okay, thank you.